This general Bible discourse is entitled Might is Right, Chapter 2, Christian Philosophic Examinations. In this discourse, I will render Christian philosophic examinations on the themes and concepts presented in Chapter 2 of Ragnar Redbeard's 1890 book, Might is Right. It should be noted that Ragnar Redbeard is a pen name and that the true name of the Chicago-based author of this book is left to speculation. The book I am reading from is the slightly revised 1927 version, which was published by the Dill Pickle Press located in Redlands, California. The title of this book, Might is Right, is reflective of the core philosophy of its author. That is, that the only thing in this world that has any moral value is strength. The book Might is Right is a 139-page book that is directed at American men. In my own opinion, this book is a philosophical writ of the importance of brute strength, useful barbarism, and social Darwinism, otherwise known as survival of the fittest, these being in relation to the ideal society. The core philosophy of this book can be summed up as such. The best course that a man can take in life is the course that yields treasure, namely power, status, money, and women. Redbeard asserts that the way to obtain this treasure is through sheer force of will and a survival of the fittest mentality. The book Might is Right is important because it is the book that best exemplifies the philosophical idea of consequentialism, which is an idea that states that a man's actions can only be determined to be moral or immoral based upon whether or not the outcome of his actions are favorable to him. So in other words, if a man does something, be it good or evil, and the outcome of his actions are favorable to him, then his actions are moral. If the outcome of his actions are not favorable to him, then they are immoral. This book is also the blueprint for the precepts that govern the Church of Satan, namely those precepts that advocate self-preservation as the ultimate gospel. This book also serves as a reference point for the various far-right groups in relation to their beliefs concerning racial superiority and anti-miscegenation. Chapter 2 of this book is of particular importance to me as a Bible commentator because it focuses on Christianity and the legacy of Jesus Christ in relation to the consequentialist philosophic way of thinking. I will inform you in advance that Ragnar Redbeard was above all a militant atheist and someone that saw religion as a universal stumbling block that hinders man's evolution as a species. Furthermore, the language, points of reference, and allegories that Redbeard uses to illustrate his opinings are bold, blunt, and shocking. My intention in analyzing this book is to examine and interpret Ragnar Redbeard's philosophy on life in relation to Christian theological ideas of life. This endeavor is particularly appealing to me because Redbeard's philosophy on life is antithetical to the Christian theological idea of life. This book is made up of 7 chapters. Each chapter is divided up into several sections. These sections on average contain approximately 8 paragraphs apiece. I will read, examine, and interpret chapter 2 of this book in its entirety and reveal the section I am reading from as I go along. Chapter 2 of the book, Might is Right, contains 12 sections. This discourse will consist of a brief introduction into the contents of Chapter 2, a full reading of the contents of each section, and an examination of each section's contents. Might is Right, Chapter 2, Iconoclastic. Chapter 2 of this book is entitled Iconoclastic. This is a word that means an assault on traditional values. This title is likely Redbeard's reference to Christianity and the gospel of Jesus Christ being an assault on the dignity of man's natural ideas of strength and progress. Chapter 2. As far as sociology is concerned, we must either abandon our reason or abandon Christ. He is preeminently the prophet of unreason, the preacher of rabble-rabies. All that is enervating and destructive of manhood he glorifies. All that is self-reliant and heroic he denounces. Lazarus, the filthy and diseased vagrant, is his hero of heroes, and Dives, the sane, energetic citizen, is his awful example of baseness and criminality. He praises the humble, and he curses the proud. He blesses the failures and damns the successful. All that is noble he perverts. All that is atrocious he upholds. He inverts all the natural instincts of mankind and urges us to live artificial lives. He commands the demonetization of virtues that aggrandize a people, and advises his admirers to submit in quietness to every insult, contumely, indignity, to be slaves de facto. Indeed, there is scarce one thought in the whole of his dicta that is practically true. O Christ, thou artful fiend, thou great subverter, what an amazing Iblis glamour thou hast cast over the world. Thou mean, insignificant-minded Jew. Why is it that our modern philosophers are so mortally afraid to boldly challenge the inspired utopianism of this poor self-deluded Galilean mountaineer, this preacher of all eunuch virtues, of self-abasement, of passive suffering? The sickly humanitarian ethics so eloquently rayed forth by Jesus Christ and his superstitious successors in ancient Judea and throughout the moribund Roman Empire are generally accepted in Anglo-Saxondom as the very elixir of immortal wisdom, the purest, wisest, grandest, most incontrovertible of all divine revelations or occult thaumaturgies. And yet, when closely examined, they are found to be neither divine, occult, reasonable, nor even honest, but composed almost exclusively of the stuff that nightmares are made of, together with a strong dash of oriental legerdemain. Through 1,000 different channels, current politico-economic belief is dominated by the base communistic Kabbalah of the man of many sorrows, yet as a practical theorem it is hardly ever critically examined, Why is it that the suggested social solutions promulgated by Jesus, Peter, Paul, James, and other Asiatic cataleptics are accepted so meekly by us upon trust? If these men were anything, they were crude socialist reformers with misshapen souls, preachers of a new heaven and a new earth, that is to say, demagogues, politicians of the slums, and out of the slums nothing that is noble can ever be born. As agitators, Jesus and his modern continuators shall be exclusively considered in these pages. However, it must be distinctly understood that the spiritual and temporal and all cosmologies are so intricately interwoven that it is almost impossible to completely divorce them. Like the Siamese twins, gods and governments are inextricably bound together. So much, indeed, that if you kill one, the other cannot live. Hence the open or secret alliance that has always existed between the politician and the priest. Whatever their primitive purity or impurity, all operative creedal philosophies are essentially civil and military codes, police regulations. Religion is a power, a political engine, and if there was no God, I would have to invent one, said the great Napoleon. In letter and in spirit, Christianity is above all things a political theory, and a theory that often takes the form of raging hysterics. Religions are the matrix in which public institutions are generally molded. This has ever been well understood by the dominant leaders of mankind, from Numa to Brigham Young, from Solon to Loyola, from Constantine to the lowest Levite hireling who gets paid in dimes and cents for his unctuous mock dithyrambs. Section 1. In Section 1, Ragnar Redbeard begins by expressing his disapproval for the doctrinal philosophy that Jesus Christ taught. Jesus Christ's teachings to Redbeard are that of a person who is preaching a message of servitude, submission, and failure. Ragnar further explains that Jesus Christ teaches self-abasement, self-castration, and lowly dispositions as the gospel. Furthermore, Redbeard asserts that the West has accepted these Christian teachings as the gospel truth and as the epitome of wisdom. Redbeard further describes Jesus and his disciples as politicians of the slums, meaning that they themselves and their target audience were the kinds of people that could never desire the finer things in life out of fear of violating some divine commandment or precept, and therefore are incapable of becoming noble. Redbeard goes on to inform the reader that the entirety of chapter 2 will be dedicated to explaining Jesus' role in the decline of masculinity and of the ideal virtues that should govern the movements of mankind. Redbeard states that it is impossible to divorce politics and religion, and that in all matters under the sun that involves one, the other is also involved. He further suggests that one of these, in fact, cannot survive without the other. This would imply, at least in Ragnar Redbeard's judgment, that if church and state were separate, they would each implode and cease to exist altogether. Redbeard goes on to assert that the religious doctrines and philosophies are police codes and instructions for the masses that carry an expectation similar to that of state laws. This is stated by Redbeard to further suggest that religion and politics are more than just similar in substance, but that they are one another. Redbeard goes on to assert the necessity for religion in relation to civil order. He quotes Napoleon Bonaparte, the 19th Emperor of France, that God is a necessity for civil order to the degree that if God did not exist, that he, Napoleon, would make one up, presumably to control the people with the ideas of that God, with the commandments of that God, with the need for people to worship that God. This is important to the narrative of this chapter in that it recommends that anyone that adheres to a religion of any kind is merely a controlled individual, someone who is weak of mind and character, someone who is destined to lean on religious teachings as a crutch, and someone whose destiny is to be controlled by atheistic ruling classes. Redbeard goes on to assert that Christianity is little more than a political theory, a tool for power-hungry politicians to control the herd, and a theory that more often than not manifests itself as religious babblings and raging hysteria. Redbeard goes on to assert that religion, its precepts, and its overall makeup is the template by which societies are formed. He goes on to mention how ruling figures such as Numa Pompilius, the 8th century BC second king of Rome, Brigham Young, the 19th century second president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Solon, the 6th century Greek politician, Saint Ignatius Loyola, the 16th century Catholic priest and founder of the Jesuits, Emperor Constantine, the 4th century Western Roman emperor and the first Roman emperor to embrace Christianity, and the early Levitical priest, the late 14th century BC biblical priests that earned their living from modest means and inheritances, all in fact ruled massive populations with religion at the forefront of their respective political sovereignty. Section 2. All ye are brethren. Are all men really brethren? Negro and Indian, black fellow, Kalmuk and Coolie, the well-born and the base-bred, beer soaker and loafer, and hero-hearted patriot, belted chieftain and ignoble mechanic slave, pot of iron and pot of clay. What proof is there that the brotherhood of man hypothesis is in accordance with nature? On what trustworthy biologic, historic, or other evidence does it rest? If it is natural, then rivalry, competition, and strife are unnatural. And it is proposed to prove in this book that strife, competition, rivalry, and the wholesale destruction of feeble types of men is not only natural, but highly necessary. Has brotherhood ever been tried upon the earth? Where, when, and with what final result? Is not self-assertion nobler, grander, and more truly heroic than self-denial? Is not self-abasement but another term for voluntary vassalage, voluntary burden-bearing? Christ might well and truthfully have said unto his followers, Come unto me, all ye that are weary and heavy laden, and I will bind you in unbreakable bonds, and load you down like an ass between two burdens. The poor and ignorant were his first followers. The vagrants, the disinherited, shiftless classes, and to this very day, the poorer and more ignorant men and women are the more eager to follow his religious ideals or the political millennialisms that are distilled out of his delusions. If we only lived as Christ lived, what a beautiful world this would be, saith all thoughtless ones. If we lived as Christ lived, there would be none of us left to live. He begat no children. He labored not for his bread. He possessed neither house nor home. He merely talked. Consequently, he must have existed on charity or have stolen bread. If we all lived like Christ, would there have been anyone left to labor, to be begged from, to be stolen from? If we all lived like Christ, is thus a self-evident absurdity. No wonder that is recorded. Not many wise after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called, but God chose the foolish things out of the world, and God chose the weak things of the world, and the things that are despised. Nothing else would have anything to do with him. Christ was indeed the prophet of the credulous rabble during 3 years of active agitation, and it abandoned him in his hour of need, what always happens under similar circumstances. For the rabble is ever cowardly, ungenerous, suspicious, unfathomably base. It has never yet had a leader of commanding ability, either in peace or in war, that it did not ultimately desert or betray. I.e., if he did not take the precaution to make himself its master. After permitting Christ to be butchered, the mob thereupon set him up as their divinity and erected altars to his renown. Slaves, women, madmen, lepers, Magdalenes were the earliest Christians, and to this hour, women, children, slaves, and lunatics are the raw material of the Christian church. Primitive Christianity cunningly appealed to the imagination of a world of superstitious slaves, eager for some mode of escape that meant not giving and receiving of battle strokes. It organized them for the overthrow of heroic principles and substituted for a genuine nobility based upon battle selection, a crafty theocracy founded upon priestcraft, hellcraft, almsgiving, politicalisms, and all that is impure and subterranean. It is a doctrine at once disgraceful of its antecedents, its teachers, and itself. Truly it has been called the fatal dower of Constantine, for it has suffocated or is suffocating the seeds of heroism. Both ancient and modern Christianism, and all that has its roots therein, is the negation of everything grand, noble, generous, heroic, and the glorification of everything feeble, atrocious, dishonorable, dastardly. The cross is now, and ever has been, an escutcheon of shame. It represents a gallows and a Semite slave swinging thereon. For 2,000 years it has absolutely overturned human reason, overthrown common sense, infected the world with madness, submissiveness, degeneracy. Truly there is a way which seemeth right unto a people, but the ends thereof are the ways of death. Sound the loud timbrel, o'er the lands and o'er waves. The Israelite triumphs, the nations are graves. Examination of Section 2. Redbeard begins Chapter 2 by questioning mankind's brotherhood, stating that race, disposition, and class all sharply divide mankind. Redbeard then asserts that there is no proof for the assertion that all men are brothers. He states that competition between the races is as natural as anything under the sun. He begins to assert that forcing oneself into a mindset of peace and love in relation to other races is both unnatural and a form of self-abasement. He asserts that the teachings of Jesus Christ ultimately served to this end, namely self-abasement and mental slavery. Redbeard's core argument here seems to be that it isn't natural or healthy for a man to abase himself. Self-exaltation is, in Redbeard's estimation, the natural inclination of man. He then goes on to assert that people who are poor, downtrodden, ignorant, and impressionable are most likely to follow the teachings of Jesus Christ. Redbeard goes on to assert that Jesus Christ was not very impressive. Redbeard asserts that Jesus was, according to scriptures, childless, unemployed, and homeless, that all Jesus did was talk, and he never established himself in society the way that a man should. Redbeard goes on to assert that the ministry of Jesus Christ was little more than 3 years of rambling, that Jesus' divinity failed to shine in his time of need, and that his ultimate demise was his butchering at the hands of an angry mob. Redbeard asserts that Jesus was made into a god only after he was crucified, and that his divinity rests merely upon altars, statues, monuments, and relics. He then goes on to assert that women, children, slaves, superstitious people, and lunatics make up the core congregation of the Christian church. Redbeard goes on to assert that Christianity and Christian precepts, namely those of self-sacrifice, praise and worship, patience, kindness, and turning the other cheek, are degenerate in nature and have egregiously contributed to the downfall of heroic principles, namely those of bravery and courage, and is furthermore the negation of all things grand and desirable, and is instead the manifestation of subservience, self-doubt, and dishonor. Redbeard then categorizes Jesus' crucifixion as little more than a shameful display of the execution of a Semite slave. It should be noted that Redbeard's philosophy on life and Jesus, as if he were truly the divine Son of God, he should have then used his trial as an opportunity to prove his divinity, rescue himself, and establish himself as an eternal king upon the earth. This scenario in Redbeard's world would have been an act of heroism. Instead, however, Jesus opted to allow his own execution and burial, and although described in the scriptures as an act of atonement for the sins of mankind, Redbeard categorizes such actions as self-debasing cowardice. Section 2 concludes with a poem that reads as such. Sound the loud timbrel o'er the lands and o'er waves, the Israelite triumphs, the nations are graves. This poem appears to assert that the success of the Judeo-Christian religion means the death of nations. This poem might further suggest that if Judeo-Christianity is destroyed, then the nations can prosper once again. Section 3. Is the golden rule a rational rule? Is it not rather a menial rule, a coward rule, a best policy rule? Why is it right for one man to do unto others as he would have others do to him, and what is right? If others are made to injure him or do good to him, why should he consider them at all? Why should he take any more notice of them than of so many worms? If they are all endeavoring to injure him, and able to do it, why should he refrain from returning the compliment? Should he not combat them? Does not that give them carte blanche to injure and destroy him? May it not be doing good for others to war against them, to annihilate them? May it not also be good for them to war against others? Again, what is good? Is it reasonable to ask praying animals to do unto others as they would be done by? If they acted accordingly, could they survive? If some only accepted the golden rule as their guiding moral maxim, would they not become a prey to those who refuse to abide thereby? Upon what reasonable and abiding sanction does this rule rest? Has it ever been in actual operation among men? Can it ever be successfully practiced on earth or anywhere else? Did Jesus Christ practice it himself upon all occasions? Did his apostles, his sons of thunder, practice it? Did Peter the boaster do so when he denied him for fear of arrest at the campfire? Did Judas the financier when he sold him for net cash? Also, how many of his modern-day lip servants actually practice it in their daily business intercourse with each other? How many? These questions require no formal answering. They answer themselves in the asking. And here it must be remembered that the best test of a witness is cross-examination. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. No baser precept ever fell from the lips of a feeble Jew. It is from alleged moralisms of this sort and fabulous principles that our mob orators, our communards, revivalists, anarchists, red Republicans, Democrats, and other mob worshippers in general derive the infernal inspiration that they are perpetually hissing forth. Even the subversive pyrotechnic watchwords of their Mephisto millennium are to be found in the Holy Gospels. It is not written, and God sendeth angels to destroy the people. Behold, these men are the angels that he sends, politicians and reformers. Examination of Section 3. Redbeard begins Section 3 by questioning the golden rule, namely the scripture found in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 7 verse 12 that reads, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." He asserts that would benefit a person to even consider the existence of another person if that other person lacks the power to either harm or help him. I'll say that once more. He asserts why it would benefit a person to even consider the existence of another person if that other person lacks the power to either harm or help him. Redbeard appears to assert that this doctrine is base, inefficient, unreasonable, and burdensome to people living in today's unforgiving and highly competitive world. He then compares man to animals in the sense that you could never reasonably tell a carnivorous beast of the field to do unto its prey as he would have the prey do unto him. Redbeard asserts that if a person were to live by the golden rule, then they would surely become prey to fitter animals, namely other people. Redbeard asserts that Jesus Christ was a feeble Jew, and that his words concerning a person preemptively treating everyone that they interact with as they themselves would like to be treated are self-defeating and foolish. Section 4. Love one another, you say, is the supreme law, but what power made it so? Upon what rational authority does the gospel of love rest? Is it even possible to practice, and what would result from its universal application to active affairs? Why should I not hate mine enemies and hunt them down like the wild beasts that they are? Again I ask why. If I love them, does that not place me at their mercy? Is it natural for enemies to do good unto each other, and what is good? Can the torn and bloody victim love the blood-splashed jaws that rend it limb from limb? Are we not all predatory animals by instinct? If humans ceased wholly from preying upon each other, could they continue to exist? Love your enemies and do good to them that hate you and despitefully use you, is the despicable philosophy of the spaniel that rolls upon its back when kicked. Obey it, O reader, and you and all your posterity to the 10th generation shall be irretrievably and literally damned. They shall be hewers of wood and carriers of water, degenerates, Gibeonites. But hate your enemies with a whole heart, and if a man smites you on one cheek, smash him down. Smite him hip and thigh, for self-preservation is the highest law. He who turns the other cheek is a cowardly dog, a Christian dog. Give blow for blow, scorn for scorn, doom for doom, with compound interest liberally added thereunto. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, eye fourfold, 100-fold. Make yourself a terror to your adversary, and when he goeth his way, you will possess much additional wisdom to ruminate over. Thus shall you make yourself respected in all the walks of life, and your spirit, your immortal spirit, shall live not in an intangible paradise, but in the brains and thews of your aggressive and unconquerable sons. After all, the true proof of manhood is a splendid progeny, and it is a scientific axiom that the timid animal transmit timidity to its descendants. If men lived like brothers and had no powerful enemies, neighbors, to contend with and surpass, they would rapidly lose all their best qualities, like certain oceanic birds that lose the use of their wings because they do not have to fly from pursuing beasts of prey. If all men had treated each other with the brotherly love since the beginning, what would have been the result now? If there had been no wars, no rivalry, no competition, no kingship, no slavery, no survival of the toughest, no racial extermination, truly what a festering hell fenced in this old globe would be. Examination of Section 4. Redbeard begins Section 4 by questioning the rationality of universal unconditional love, particularly in the context that Jesus taught, namely the commandment to love thine enemies. Redbeard asserts that a man should hate his enemies and hunt them down like the beasts that they are. He asserts that if a man were to love his enemies, then they would surely become their slaves. The example used in Redbeard's line of reasoning here is the Gibeonites of the Bible book of Joshua chapter 9. The Gibeonites, in an attempt to avoid decimation at the hand of Joshua the judge and the advancing Israelite army, offered themselves to the Israelites as slaves. Redbeard is asserting that nations, tribes, and people that adhere to degenerate ideas of living, such as love thine enemy, are the moral and functional equivalent to the Gibeonites, a voluntarily subjugated group. Redbeard then goes on to compare those who turn the other cheek to cowardly dogs, namely Christian dogs. It should be noted that Ragnar Redbeard's disdain for Christianity is a byproduct of his ideas on self-preservation as the ultimate morality. Christianity, on the other hand, is the opposite of this mentality. Some of the more prevalent elements of Christianity include self-sacrifice, as shown in the book of Matthew chapter 9, verse 21. In Matthew 9, verse 21, Jesus tells a rich man to sell all that he has and to give everything to the poor. A naturally unappealing proposition to a man of great wealth. Redbeard sees narratives such as these as a prime example for why Christianity is a lunatic and undesirable religion for a person to dedicate their lives to. Redbeard adds that in matters of competition, a person should adopt an eye for an eye mentality only with compound interest placed upon your transgressor. This means that a person should hit back when provoked only several times harder, namely so that the fear of the Lord would be instilled upon your enemy so as to deter them from bothering you any further. Redbeard goes on to assert that if this world never experienced any interracial competition, that it would be a microcosm of hell on account of how undeveloped mankind's natural fighting instincts would be. This might suggest that in Redbeard's self-preservationist philosophy, that competition in all of its forms is perfectly natural, perfectly healthy human activity, and should not only be embraced but participated in with the intention to win the competition. Section 5. Reverend Ferdinand M. Sprague of Chicago, who may be taken as a common specimen of the priest-politician, in a little pamphlet lately published entitled The Laws of Social Evolution, writes thus: "The sheet anchor of socialism, according to its ablest exponents, is the holy Christian religion. Its motto, founded on the precept, 'Love thy neighbor as thyself,' is each for all and all for each. Its working principle for the present is altruism. Nearly all the canonized fathers of the early Roman propaganda, most of whom, by the way, were slaves, freedmen, or eunuchs, advocated similar ideals. Even now, the anointed and sanctified head of the Catholic Church resurrects the same hoary old utopianism in a Jesuitic encyclical addressed to his flock. How suggestive of being shorn and skinned is that word flock. Again, the Epistle of James, who is known to have been Christ's full brother, killed by a special policeman's club in a street riot, has been reprinted and widely circulated by socialists in order to sow and broadcast their illogical theories of a universal brotherhood founded upon enforced labor, regimentation of the herd, and majority votes. Many modern critics are also infested with plausible epileptoid priestlings of unreason like Dr. McGlynn, Professor Bemis, Hugh Price, Hughes, W.T. Stead, Myron Reed, and Professor Heron of California. All of these men are unrivaled masters in the art of persuasive declamation. They accept the New Testament as their textbook and preach therefrom to morbid multitudes the atrocious and shallow gospel of equal rights, equal liberty, equal brotherhood as the veritable omnific word. The newly discovered emancipating protocol of the crucified yet almighty Don Quixote, the Savior God of Asia Minor, he who was born in a cattle shed and died on a gallows." Examination of Section 5. Redbeard begins Section 5 by introducing the reader to the Reverend Ferdinand M. Sprague, a Chicago area preacher who believed that the gospel of Jesus Christ is a socialist gospel and that the common good is at the centerpiece of it. According to Redbeard, Sprague sees the gospel as altruistic, meaning that it has a quality that facilitates the desire for people who have to take care of the people that do not have. Redbeard goes on to assert that the founders of modern Christianity were all slaves, former slaves, or eunuchs, and further suggests that the current heads of the Catholic Church, up to and including the Pope, preach these same old boring theological doctrines to the sheep-like Christian masses. Redbeard suggests that the Christian doctrine and philosophy can be summed up in the book of James, the brother of Jesus, who Redbeard disdainfully describes as a loser, who was killed by a street riot, who was killed in a street riot rather, with a policeman's billy club. Redbeard appears to equate the book of James to an extension of the glorification of the castrated existence that constitutes Christianity. This assertion is likely a reference to the book of James chapter 4 verses 1 through 6, which reads, "From whence came wars and fighting among you? Come they not hence, even of your lusts that war in your members? Ye lust and have not. Ye kill and desire to have, and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet ye have not because ye ask not. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lusts. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. Do ye think that the Scripture saith in vain, the Spirit that dwelleth in us lusteth to envy, but he giveth more grace? Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble." These verses represent the very core of Christian philosophy and doctrine that exhorts selfless humility in favor of glorious gain, namely, in order to secure salvation through Jesus Christ. Redbeard appears to assert that such doctrines castrate and hinder the natural strength and desire for more that constitute the male spirit. Redbeard further asserts that many of the top preachers of the day very foolishly and deceptively preach these mind-numbing doctrines to the wistless masses, creating in society an egalitarian, anti-competitive, and self-defeating atmosphere that restricts man's natural ambition. Redbeard then describes the central figure of Christianity, namely Jesus Christ, as a loser, comparable to the overly romantic Don Quixote, this being the same Jesus Christ that was born in a cattle shed and died on the gallows. Section 6. A God begging his bread from door to door. A God without a place to lay his head. A God spiked to 2 pieces of cross scantling. A God stabbed to death by an hired officer. A God executed by order of a stipendiary magistrate. What an insane idea. Is it an idea, or rather a wasting cranial disease? Talk about the heathen in his blindness and superstitious madness in past ages. Why is it as child's play to the hysteric idolatry of today? The deification of a Jew, the divine Democrat, was executed upon a government gibbet because the rulers of imperial Rome were more powerful men than he was. His strength and that of his followers was not equal to theirs. He died an abysmal failure, a redeemer who did not redeem, a savior who did not save, a Messiah whipped like a calf, a slave agitator deservedly destroyed for preaching a falsehood, the monstrous gospel of love, brotherhood, equality. Even from the spiritual point of view, there is nothing whatever in his life or its after effects to show that the pale man upon the cross, when he moaned and wept so bitterly, beheld any further down the void than those who gathered round to see him die. Of what use was that pale dreamer to the iron conditions that existed in the conquered and garrisoned fortress of Jerusalem? For once the city mob were on the right trail when they petitioned for the release of Barabbas rather than the supple singer of a sweet by and by. Barabbas is described in the scriptures as a petty thief. He was really an armed insurgent leader, the slayer of Roman tax gatherers, a guerrilla chief like Rob Roy, Robin Hood, William Wallace, William Tell, who levied toll upon opulent Hebrews for patriotic purposes. Had I been there that day, I also would have joined in the demand, "Release Barabbas unto us." Better one Barabbas than 1,000 Christs. Alas, alas, O Galilean, thou art neither the way, the truth, nor the light. Examination of Section 6. Ragnar Redbeard further asserts Jesus' undesirable disposition in that he was a so-called God that was a homeless beggar, a man who died an ignoble death, a man that was thrust through by a paid Roman soldier, and a man who was condemned by a paid magistrate, namely Pontius Pilate. Redbeard goes on to assert that a man such as this, being called a God, is an insane idea and a result of a mental disorder in those that believe such a theological assertion. This passage is interesting because it seems to imply that Redbeard is largely disgusted by the assertion of Jesus Christ as a God by virtue of his trampled upon mortal fate. This also implies that Redbeard is probably more inclined to respect the assertion of gods such as Zeus, Apollo, Hermes, Dionysus, Hercules, and other more heroic and triumphant deities as gods more worthy of praise and worship. Redbeard goes on to assert that Jesus Christ was an unfit candidate for godhood because he was a Jew. This might assert that according to Redbeard, who in this book habitually castigates Jews, that Jewish men have an innate degeneracy, namely an inclination to lose, that makes them beneath being called heroes altogether. He goes on to assert that Jesus was whipped like an animal, was along with his followers outdueled by the Romans, and was rightfully killed for preaching a monstrous message of love, brotherhood, and equality, all ideas in Redbeard's estimation that represent the castration of the natural inclinations of man, namely the inclination to assert himself, compete, and win. This passage to me is particularly significant in this book because it represents a sort of satire in relation to Redbeard's assertion about Jesus Christ and Christianity. It gives the reader some semblance that Redbeard has given the reader something to think about, something to ponder, rather than just being a raw exhibition of Redbeard's disdain of Christianity on philosophical grounds. This passage almost reads like a challenge to Christians, a call for explanation, a call for exposition. Considering these assertions of Jesus' divinity, of his followers' fortitude, of the substance of his birth, his ministry, his death, what is Jesus' appeal? How is this man, this God's total existence or reported existence, more relevant than the here and now, the mortal journey of mankind, or mankind's natural inclinations and desires? Redbeard goes on to describe Jesus Christ as a defeated fellow, a man more worthy to be crucified than Barabbas, who in Redbeard's estimation was a heroic fellow, a guerrilla chief, a slayer of the corrupt, a bringer of liberty. Redbeard goes on to assert that Jesus Christ as a savior, a leader, and a God is a grievous falsehood. Section 7. Reverting, however, to Chicago's Reverend Utopia construction, thus waileth he with cajoling crudity, the laws of social evolution, far from being the blind, barbarous, and brutal struggle for organic existence, consist in the physical, intellectual, and moral well-being of all the members of society, so constituted that the political, ethical principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity so have the largest possible realization throughout the social organism. The main features of the condition of progress are Christian churches, Christian schools, Christian governments, Christian ethics, and economics. Another seductive but most malignant state socialist, Henry George, roundly proclaims that the salvation of society, the hope of the free, and full development of humanity is in the gospel of brotherhood, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and thereupon he proposes to make politicians the national rent tax collectors, administrators of everything in general, and all-around distributors of state pensions to the poor and needy. Has not mankind had sufficient experience of what politicians are, those black-hearted creeping thieves and frauds? Their sting is deadlier than the bite of a cobra, and in the breath of their mouth there is death. Curses be upon ye, O ye politicians, and upon all who advocate increasing your prerogatives. Presidential candidates from Jefferson to Lincoln, also their apish imitators, have generally indulged in equally shallow rhodomantide, because it means votes, and for votes office seekers would dress up in glowing language and rave forth any devilish deception. For 2,000 years these effeminate superlatives have been trumpeted to the remotest corner of every Christian land, and yet while enervating the morale of people, they have dismally failed to inaugurate the much foretold earthly paradise. They were preached by barefoot monks at the inauguration of the Dark Ages, in order that those saintly lovers of the common people might creep into the administration of cooperative wealth and power. Now the same general ideas are revived and dressed up this time in politico-economic garb by the eloquent agitator, in order that he may rule and plunder the future through the agency of the state, just as the priest once ruled and plundered through the equally rapacious agency of the church. When the church triumphed, the Dark Ages began, and when it is finally rooted out, together with all its social antenna, the heroic age dawns once more. True heroes shall be born again as of old, for our women may yet be something more than rickety, perambulating dolls and drugstores and spectacles. The church is the idol of the priestly parasite. The state is the idol of the political parasite. Beware, O America, that in escaping from the holy trickery of the monk, you fall not an easy prey to the loving kindness of the politician. Even if the reformer succeeds in reestablishing upon majority votes the dark tyranny of the greatest number, we have this consolation to fall back on. Such organization must ultimately tumble down of its own weight, and then redivide up into warring fragments. Nothing that is unnatural can last for long. The universal church is no more. All we see of it now is jealous remnants. And the universal state, the social democracy, the economic republic, the brotherhood of man, should they take practical form, are preordained to similar failure. All they could do would be to postpone the operation of the survival of the fittest, drugging nations in temporary sedatives. No matter how eagerly madmen may try to do it, there is no known process whereby they could jump out of their own skins. Christians or socialist churches, paternalisms, schools, governments, administrations, ethics, and moralisms, even if genuinely Christian and fraternal, would be wholly impotent to change the natural course of things, and therefore powerless to command the survival of mental and physical cripples, even although those cripples were as canonized saints for goodness, and as the sands of the seashore for numbers. Shrieking sentimentalism is indeed a feeble lever wherewith to overturn the immutable order of the universe. It cannot do it. No, not if it were whooped into the crack of doom. Not even if it had a Lamb of God in every city, ready to be butchered each Friday afternoon in order to make a Christian holiday. Examination of Section 7. In Section 7, Redbeard describes the hypocrisy of preachers and politicians that exploit Christianity and Christian doctrines in order to gain power and influence over the masses. He describes Christian institutions such as Christian schools, churches, and the like as mediums by which the blood-sucking, power-grabbing politicians make their political cases to the masses. He asserts that these same politicians make their institutions of public welfare and other government programs more appealing to the masses by first claiming to delight in the Word of God. Redbeard further asserts that the masses, drained of all of their energy and ambition by these conniving politicians, accept what they tell them is true and therefore give these politicians the keys to their collective will as a constituency. Redbeard goes on to assert that the masses are in a sense brainwashed by the mechanisms that politicians use to gain their respect and trust. Although the politicians never deliver on the utopian society that they promise to the people in their stump speeches and so forth. Redbeard goes on to assert that religion is merely the footing by which politicians use to plunder the public trust and make themselves fat through corrupt means. Redbeard compares religion to a sedative for the people, a mechanism by which people escape from the harsh realities of an unfulfilled and mundane existence. This sentiment echoes Karl Marx, the Jewish philosopher and economist, when he asserted approximately 50 years prior that religion is the opiate of the masses. Redbeard goes on to assert that religion, namely the universal church, is little more than a postponement of man's natural inclinations, namely those inclinations that facilitate the emergence of the fittest society. Redbeard goes on to assert that the religious and political mechanisms that dominate society are not natural and are therefore not permanent. Redbeard predicts that the socio-religious political mechanisms that persist in Western societies will eventually crumble and fall under the weight of mankind's primal instinct to self-govern, and doing so without complex political or religious mechanisms dominating this self-governance. Section 8. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Those three great lights of modern democracies are three colossal falsehoods, ignoble slave shibboleths, impossible of actualization even if proclaimed by some superhuman Satan, followed by armed hosts of unkillable demons, all armed to the teeth with flaming swords, Greek fire, and dynamite cannon. You may trace equality in letters of silver on tablets of burnished gold, but without engineering a perpetual miracle, you cannot make it true. You may write fraternity in blazing diamonds on walls of enduring granite, but without reversing the mechanism of the universe, you cannot make it a fact. And though you inscribe freedom on countless sheepskins and rivet statues of liberty on every harbor rock, yet with all the king's horses and all the king's men, one being born to a hireling and a subordinate, no power can be free. Can you build up a marble palace with mud and slime? Oh, ye driveling bedlamites! Can you raise up a conqueror from the dunghill, or make the stupid great? Can you manufacture heroes out of hogs? Oh, ye snuffling educated swine! We can, shrieketh the raging rhetoricians of the marketplace and the editorial mill. We can, bellows the herd as it stupidly pours through the slip rails to the pithing pen. Yes, oh yes, with the love of Jesus in our collection plate, whines the soft-skinned preacher as he turns over the Sibylline leaves of his black art. Of a certainty we can, hisseth the plastic politician, the rattlesnake, the hungry basilisk, whose lawmaking is more blighting than the breath of a simoon. Thereupon towards you, O America, they one and all point the finger of pride towards you. America, where the politicians rage and the people imagine vain things, and the dogs in the alley are baying at the moon. Then turn I away, sadly, 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 and I brush against a slave in copper-riveted overalls hurrying to his mill, and against another in a gold chain and a silken hat hasting to his money-changing, and a lean woman in sordid rags with a pile of lumber balanced upon her crown, and a splendid harlot in diamonds and a brilliant plumage rideth slowly by. And the catteth in the slaughter yard are lowing for their hay, and a draught mare with a galled shoulder lieth swollen and dead on the frozen paving blocks. How nauseous it all is. Loathsome, loathsome, all loathsome. Examination of Section 8. Redbeard begins Chapter 8 by asserting the concepts of freedom, equality, and fraternity are falsehoods that for all intent and purposes should be shunned on account of their lack of feasibility. Redbeard asserts that these concepts are fabrications that will never stand the test of time. He asserts that no matter how fervently these concepts are aggrandized, that they will always be high structures made of slime and dwelling places made of mud. Redbeard further asserts in these passages that stupid, feeble, and ignoble men that would never attain status or any measure of note in a heroic society are made into politicians, theologians, preachers, philosophers, and other high-ranking figures in these ignoble, Christian-driven, politically driven societies by virtue of the slimy, ignoble, cowardly, and self-debasing atmospheres that are present as a result of the religious, political, economic mechanisms that are present in America at this time. Redbeard appears to assert in these passages that there will always be individuals in society that are fitter than other individuals in society. The term fit refers to a person's will, their intelligence, their aptitude, their adaptability, their overall personal disposition, and their propensity to assert themselves to their own benefit in spite of people who exhibit these qualities to a lesser degree constantly being in the general vicinity of these fit individuals. This is important because it shows that the fitter individuals do not let the ignoble nature of the less fit individuals cloud their judgment or hinder their progress throughout their lives. They stand firm, they stand on their own 2 feet, and they press forward in their ambitions, in their interests, and in the interests of their families. Redbeard asserts that American society is hardly a potent representation of the flowing scriptures and mesmerizing assertions made by priests and politicians. He describes the abominable economic inequalities that exist in America as an example of this. He describes some men as being slave laborers dressed in overalls, hurrying to their meager jobs at the local mill, while usurious money changers dressed in silk clothing and gold chains go to their luxurious jobs. He describes some women as being malnourished, poorly dressed, and carriers of wood who labor endlessly, while other women, acting as harlots for rich men, are adorned with diamonds and ride past the common folk slowly so as to flaunt her wealth. Redbeard asserts further that these conditions present a hellish scenario where even animals are impoverished and they disgrace the plains with their rotting corpses. Section 9. Man is part and parcel of the animal kingdom, and notwithstanding Jefferson, Franklin, and Lincoln, Karl Marx, Lassalle, and Liebknecht, Christ, Robespierre, and Rousseau, Heinemann, Tennyson, and Mazzini, Dr. Adler, Bebel, George, and Isaiah, Bellamy, Gronlund, and W.T. Stead. He cannot escape from the draconic ordinances that despotically govern that kingdom and environ his being like an atmosphere on every side. Altruism, meek and lowly self-abnegation upon any extended scale is among predatory organisms, and all organisms are predatory, impossible of practice on pain of wholesale philosophy. Every man is under obligation to fight and bear his own burden. If he cannot do so, others cannot do his fighting or his burden bearing, and their own at the same time with reasonable safety to themselves. He therefore who finds it impossible to carry his own burden had better sink down and die in his tracks than to impose an additional load upon the shoulders of his kind-hearted fellow strugglers, for then they would be overloaded and consequently unable to fight successfully, so all might perish together. Practical fraternal sympathy upon any universal scale has also had in the end a most destructive effect on the internal structure of communities. Men will always love and cherish those that are near and dear to them, but when it is proposed to extend the circle of the near and dear ones to all mankind, that is going rather too far. Indeed, all must perish ignominiously if that foolish idea prevails. All are even now enervating themselves, undermining their strength by futile overexertion in that very direction. They are straining themselves to death by endeavoring to carry an impossible load. The majority of men are born far too weak constitutionally for their conditions, and the few who possess the necessary stamina and grit will have quite enough to do in providing by deeds their fitness to survive, propagate, and possess. Many are projected, few are selected. Yet altruism, wholesale self-renunciation, wholesale burden-bearing for the sake of outraged and suffering humanity is the maddening basis upon which our good Lord Jesus and his demented imitators have erected their sporadic sociology, their magnificent Satanism. Does not simple business acumen whisper to us that every man's chief occupation upon earth is to sustain himself? I mean, subsist at any cost. You shall want ere I shall. Business is business. If men had sufficient personal initiative to think along these stern lines, there would be little use on earth for the theologian and the reformer, those twin Mephistos who find their renown and grandeur in the abasement of mankind. The battle of life would then be so grim, terrible, and realistic, so Trojan in fact, that those holy dissimulators and crafty deceivers would rapidly die off or be eaten off, for in the clash of naked interests, the best and bravest only could possibly survive, and no one would ever dream of including them among the best or bravest. Examination of Section 9. Section 9 begins with Redbeard asserting that man is an animal, despite high intelligence, strength of will, and general fortitude of renowned writers, thinkers, and theologians. He discusses the importance of everyone pulling their own weight in a society so that the society can thrive. He asserts that it is better for a man to die than to impose an undue burden on his fellow struggler. Redbeard further asserts that a society that fails to hold each man accountable for their own well-being is doomed to fail miserably. Redbeard asserts that it is that a society that fails to hold each man accountable for their own well-being is doomed to fail miserably. Redbeard asserts that it is natural for a person to want to care for and protect their loved ones. However, a person cannot accomplish this same love and care for everyone that they meet, because the person will become overextended and eventually perish under the weight of this task. Redbeard asserts that those who constitute the fittest people in a society have enough on their shoulders in the way of proving themselves of being worthy to live and prosper than to burden themselves with securing the well-being and prosperity of those who are either less fit and or less willing to exhibit the fitness that they do possess. Redbeard goes on to assert that self-abasement and revolutionary humility are the social ills that make reformers and theologians important. He asserts that these reformers and theologians are sociological villains, practicers of a magnificent Satanism, and usurpers of the minds and hearts of downtrodden people by virtue of their mesmerizing logic and awesome presence. He asserts that a person's low self-image creates a void that reformers and theologians fill with their lofty speeches and their craftily concocted rhetoric. Redbeard asserts that common sense tells us that taking care of oneself and tending to one's own interests is the highest ideal that there is. Anything to the contrary puts man's existence at a grave risk. Redbeard asserts that if a man were to take the initiative for his own well-being, think for himself, act in his own self-interest, and shun egalitarian ideas of equality and the universal common good, then society would have no need for reformers, theologians, or anything similar to these, and that these and others like them, namely those that tell people what to think, would cease to exist. Section 10. Count Leo Tolstoy, undoubtedly the ablest modern expounder of primitive Christliness, in a much translated volume entitled Work While Ye Have Light, writes thus: Our faith tells us that bliss is to be found not in resistance but in submission, not in riches but in giving everything away. We have not quite succeeded in casting off every habit of violence and property. To the most inept understanding, could any proposition be placed in a clearer light? Is it not as simple as rolling off a log that the individual who even attempts to become a true and honest Christian must become like unto a tame sheep? What a sublime ideal! How heroic! The bliss of a sheep! How superlatively delightful! How divinely glorious! And a Jew as the good shepherd, who leadeth his lambs to green pastures and quiet resting places, the pleasant waters by. For 2,000 years or so, his fleecy flocks have been fattening themselves up with commendable diligence, for the shearing shed and the butcher's block. Let any nation throw away all habits of violence, and before long it must cease to exist as a nation. It will be laid under the tribute. It will become a province, a satrapy. It will be taxed and looted in 1,000 different ways. Let any man abandon all property, also all overt resistance to aggression, and behold, the first sun will scarcely have sunk down into the west before he is a bondservant, a tributary, a beggar, or a corpse. Property is necessary to complete the free development of personality, and therefore human animals should somehow obtain a full and fair proportion thereof at any cost, or perish in the attempt. For he who cannot possess himself of property is much better buried out of sight. Our cities are literally honeycombed with treasure caverns, heaped up with gold, title deeds, silver, and instruments of credit. Our valleys and our mountains are bubbling with wealth untold, and yet poor miserable servants of Christ pass idly by. Men they call themselves. I call them castrates. If Tolstoy's obsequious principles are derived from the Sermon on the Mount, then who can deny but that the Sermon on the Mount is a sermon unto decay and slavery? If they are derived from the Golden Rule, and if the Golden Rule is the Word of God, then can it be doubted that the Word of God is the word of fraud? There is far too much of this ghastly goodness in the nation, far and away too much. Is it time men who can think and begin to emancipate themselves consider the fact that morals, laws, and decalogues were made by liars, thieves, and rogues? All good citizens, however, are hereby warned and solemnly advised not to smash up the 10 Commandments, not to burn up the Golden Rule, not to break up the moral law, for that would be terribly wicked, terribly. On the other hand, they must obey all law implicitly, no matter how it originated, and be sure above everything to order themselves lowly and reverently before executive officers of the law, even if in doing so they are deprived of their property and their liberty forever. Obedience, you see, is of God, who so loveth the world, but disobedience is horrible and of the devil, and the devil is a frightful rascal who has not the slightest respect for anybody or anything, not even the American Constitution. Let us curse the devil and then obey the law. Liberty is honestly definable as a state of complete bodily and mental self-mastership, which includeth the possession of property, also defense of weapons, and thoroughgoing independence from all official coercion or restraint. Liberty in the conventional sense is a miserable lie. To be independent is synonymous with proprietorship. To be propertyless and unarmed is the condition of actual dependence and servitude. Unarmed citizens are always enslaved citizens, always. Liberty without property is a myth, a nursery tale, believed only by babbling babies and fools in the forest. Fools in the city also. Liberty regulated by law is in practice tyranny of the darkest and foulest description, because so impersonal. There are numerous worthy, reasonable, and practical methods whereby individual tyrants may be removed, but a tyranny regulated by law is only removable by one method: the sword in the hands of men who are not afraid to use it, or to have it used against them. That is to say, the sword in the hands of the strongest. During the whole course of human history, there is not upon record one authentic instance wherein a subjugated people has ever regained property-holding liberty without first butchering its tyrants or its tyrants' armed slaves in battle, thereafter confiscating to its own use the lands and realized property that previously had been in the possession of its defeated foes and masters. This statement is made with cool deliberation and aforethought. Let it be disproved by any one creditable example to the contrary, and the author is prepared to forfeit 50,000 ounces of pure gold and enough dimes and dollars to erect in Chicago a bronze statue of our blessed Redeemer, crown of thorns and all, 100 cubits higher than the Masonic Temple. This offer is strictly bona fide and shall remain open until 1906, so that philosophers, editors, statesmen, divines, and other accomplished liars may have enough time to bind themselves wading through national archives and the putrid rubbish heaps that men call public libraries. Should some or all of said mutual admiration society, maniac geniuses go blind, also deaf, dumb, and silly, this wicked old world may probably whoop with delight, should it happen to hear of the fact. Examination of section 10. Ragnar Redbeard begins section 10 by criticizing assertions made by Leo Tolstoy, the noted author of the famous book War and Peace. Redbeard asserts that Tolstoy's assertion in another of his books, namely Work While Ye Have Light, that the best life a person can have is one where he submits and gives away, is an epileptic, inept, and unworthy philosophy. He further asserts that such a doctrine will make tame sheep out of people, and that anyone who could adhere to such a doctrine would soon become a slave, a beggar, or a corpse. Redbeard asserts that ownership of property is an essential part of a person's sense of identity and is by proxy essential to a person's development as a person. Redbeard asserts that the United States of America is lined with treasures and delicacies. He further asserts that these delicacies are constantly being passed over by the feeble, brainwashed, Christianized, castrated, and zombie-like masses. Redbeard goes on to assert that if Tolstoy's ramblings are derived from the Sermon on the Mount, then the Sermon on the Mount is an epileptic rambling that advocates self-abasement. He further asserts that if Tolstoy's ramblings are derived from the Golden Rule, then that rule is also an epileptic rambling that advocates self-abasement. Redbeard goes on to assert that there is too much goodness in the land, namely the kind of goodness that turns people into weakened sheep. Redbeard proceeds to mockingly tell the reader that the scriptures and the commandments as presented in the Holy Bible are not to be disavowed, that they are to be obeyed mindlessly. He exhorts the reader to submit to every part of the scriptures and to submit every part of himself to governing authorities, because after all, obedience is of a loving God who loves the world, and disobedience is of a disdainful Satan who disregards even the United States Constitution. Redbeard further asserts that morals, laws, and decalogues, namely the Ten Commandments, were written by thieves, rogues, and liars. Redbeard goes on to assert that the true definition of liberty is complete physical and mental self-mastery. Furthermore, Redbeard asserts that liberty is only attainable through proprietorship, namely business ownership and land ownership. Redbeard further asserts that a man must be armed if he is to call himself free. He asserts that unarmed citizens are slaves 100% of the time. Redbeard further asserts that regulated liberty, that is, liberty that is allotted to people based upon a constitution and or a set of established enforceable laws, is tyranny. This tyranny, according to Redbeard, is only beatable by those who will not hesitate to kill their oppressors with the sword. Redbeard identifies these men as though they were strong and heroic. Redbeard asserts further that no subjugated people have ever regained liberty without defeating their oppressors with the sword, and then taking the oppressor's land and property for themselves. Redbeard then in jest makes a high-stakes wager against this assertion that consists of, among other things, 50,000 ounces of gold and enough dimes and dollars to erect a bronze statue of Jesus Christ that would exceed the Masonic Temple in Chicago in height by 150 feet. Redbeard makes this bet to philosophers, editors, statesmen, divines, and other accomplished liars, as he calls them, so that they have enough time to wallow through records and such in various record vaults, libraries, and the like, in order to disprove him and claim their prize. Redbeard concludes this section by saying that if all of the above-named accomplished liars were to fall over or go crazy looking for evidence to the contrary of Redbeard's assumption, then the people of the city of Chicago would surely rejoice. Section 11. During the 3 years of Christ Jesus' peripatetic trampings, he never said anything that had not been better said 1,000 times before, by dervishes, spellbinders, and mahatmas. Neither did he do anything that had not been previously done better by the jugglers and wonder workers of Egypt, India, and Assyria. Not a few of his miracles are to this day part of the ordinary stock in trade of fortune-telling gypsies, third-class strolling players, and charlatans in general. The very phrase that he uses to sum up and memorize his patent cure-all was undoubtedly stolen directly or indirectly from Plato, the Rig Veda, or Confucius. The golden rule is not only a snare and a tangle, but it also is a literary piracy. He raised the dead, you indignantly protest. And even supposing that he did, wherein is the positive advantage? What is gained by restoring vitality to the decomposing corpse of an animal that may so easily be duplicated, an animal that is a positive nuisance numerically? What is the good of breathing the breath of life into an odorous, winding sheet full of maggots and moldy bones? Are there not plenty of animalcula on earth without dragging them out of tombs? Especially, are there not plenty of leprous Asiatics? Death and destruction are necessary to the health of this world, and therefore as natural and lovable as birth and life. Only priests and born cowards moan and weep over dying brave men. Face it with approving nonchalance. Come, lovely and soothing death, undulate around the world, serenely arriving, in the day, in the night, to all, to each, sooner or later, delicate death. He fed the hungry. But to what end, I say? Why should a famishing multitude be fed by a god, and that too, in a land said to be flowing with milk and honey? Would not such a mob be far better dead? Would not Napoleon, with his cosmic whiff of grape shot, be just the right man for such an occasion? From the harmonious nature of things, it is clear that men were intended to feed themselves by their own personal exertions, or perish like dogs. He, therefore, who feeds the hungry is really encouraging poltroonery, which includeth all other crimes, for men who quietly starve within reach of abounding plenty are all poltroons. He clothed the naked, you shriek. And why, it may be asked, should the naked be clothed, they being able-bodied? What right have they to broadcloth and fine linen, if men possess not enough sense to clothe themselves in a literal weaving mill of inexhaustible looms? Why should a god, the son of a ghost, come down from a cloud land, via a Jewish maiden's womb, to robe such groveling, miserable hounds in swaddling cloths made of cotton or wool. Clothing the naked is purely a business affair. Here it may be suggested en passant is the wearing of garments in itself a natural necessary condition of adult existence. It certainly does not render the human form divine, more healthy, or more beautiful to gaze upon, although it may prevent tenderlings from perishing of cold. Was it really intended that the man animal only should wrap itself up from the birth to death in layer over layer of disease-breeding rags? Was there not a secret vital strength in the wind and rain and storms that whirled around our forefathers' giant limbs and shaggy brows? All ethnic legends tell us that our first parents were more elegantly attired to glorious sunshine and gaudy fresh air. Whoever saw a cherubim painted in pointed shoes, pantaloons, cuffs, collars, and an overcoat, or a smirking angel in bloomer, steel-ribbed corsets and a delicate little "oh dear me, how awfully awful" style? Clothing serves more efficiently to hide abominable physical deformities of modern men and women, just as superficial educationalism served to hide their dwarfed minds. If they were to perambulate around the nude, even the street curs would bark at them out of sheer terror. Indeed, they would be more hideous to the eye than the stuffed scarecrow that adorns a relative's harrowed field, and at which our old dog Danger generally barks himself into hysterics over whenever he gets off the chain. What a horrible sight a crowd of free and independent electors would be, all sitting in a solemn conclave, sucking their thumbs, absorbing political opiates and divine euthanasia. Just think of it. Even Carlyle, the dyspeptic, would faint at the sight. The very conception of such a saddening horror makes one ill. It would be as if they all had emerged from a tomb of wool and cotton and leather. Physical distortion and mental malformation are the direct result of 2,000 years of bad breeding, that is to say, of mongrellism, of democracy, of equality, of Moody and Sankianism, Christianism, originating in the despairful and fallacious philosophy of a crucified wanderer suffering from acute morbus sacer, is now developed into an organized and worldwide conspiracy of clericals, politicals, and decadents directed en masse with Jesuitic cunning against all the primitive and heroic virtues. Our clean-skinned, heathenish ancestors, with all their vital forces unimpaired, were really the nobler type of animal. We, on the other hand, with our corrupt, irresolute, civilized hearts, our trembling nerves, our fragile, anemic constitutions, are actually the lower, the viler type. Notwithstanding the baseless optimism that courtly rhymers drivel into their airs of all of the ages, etc., etc. No people can long retain hardihood and independence whose minds become submissive to a false ideal. Examination of Section 11. In Section 11, Redbeard begins by criticizing the 3-year ministry of Jesus Christ, of who Redbeard refers to as a vagrant. And Redbeard further refers to Jesus Christ's ministry as a vagrant ministry. He describes Jesus' miracles as no better than the miracles performed by other Mid-Eastern and Oriental wizards. He suggests that the same miracles that Jesus performed 2,000 years ago are presently being performed by run-of-the-mill traveling magicians. Furthermore, Ragnar Redbeard is asserting that Jesus' best philosophical teachings and doctrines were stolen from philosophers such as Plato and Confucius. and from Indian holy books such as the Rig Veda. Redbeard goes on to assert that Jesus' miracle of raising people from the dead was worthless and inefficient. He asserts that such a miracle is gross and disgusting at best, and that the world already has enough people living in it for Jesus to be raising stinking, rotting, worm-infested corpses from the earth for no identifiable reason. Now, it should be noted that Redbeard's question as to why Jesus raised Lazarus of Bethany from the dead was answered by Christ himself in the book of John, chapter 11, verses 1 through 4. The passage reads, "Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary which anointeth the Lord with ointment, and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore his sister sent unto him, saying, Lord, behold, him whom thou lovest is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby." So according to the Bible, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead so that God the Father would be glorified through the actions of Jesus Christ the Son, thereby inspiring faith in the witnesses of this miracle, as well as the faith of future readers of this miracle, as Jesus certainly knew that his actions would be documented and distributed to future generations, the same as the exploits of the patriarchs, prophets, and the kings of the Old Testament were documented and distributed to future generations. Redbeard goes on to assert that death is nothing to fear, and that only the weak of heart, namely priests and cowards, fear it. He asserts that only the strong, the brave, and the heroic men of society face and accept death with a stoic acceptance. Redbeard then proceeds to ritualistically welcome death as both an entity and as a physical mechanism. Redbeard proceeds to assert that Jesus' feeding of the multitudes, which is another miracle that is recorded in all four of the Gospels, was a worthless and wasteful miracle as well. He asserts that the cumbersome mob was better off dead. He asserts that their incapability or unwillingness to feed themselves made them a public nuisance. Redbeard furthermore asserts that Jesus' clothing of the naked, which I should add is an allegorical reference to Jesus clothing the spiritually naked with the Word of God. This concept and doctrine likely being derivative of Matthew chapter 25, verses 36 through 40, was an act of ineptitude rather than one of heroism. Redbeard asserts that the clothing the naked is a business venture, and should be a business venture, and is an enterprise, and should be an enterprise devised by man to turn a profit and no more. Redbeard goes on to mock the culture of nudity that is present in Bible scriptures. He asserts, possibly in regard to the Adam and Eve story, that perpetual nudity is both dangerous and gross. He suggests that the Adam and Eve story, along with the paintings of naked cherubs and biblically themed artwork, is silly and misleading, and that people wandering around in their natural state would breed shame and ridicule, namely from those who value a civilized society. Redbeard goes on to assert that the sight of the Holy Roman electors absorbing superstitions and political ramblings would be a sight that would make one faint. He asserts that miscegenation, democracy, equality, and evangelical Christianity are societal ills brought about presumably by political control, contrived laws and constitutions, and the installation of fear and self-doubt in American society. He then asserts that the ancestors of the present-day man-animals were purer in their movements and ideals, and thus a nobler generation. Section 12. Blessed are the strong, for they shall possess the earth. Cursed are the weak, for they shall inherit the yoke. Blessed are the powerful, for they shall be reverenced among men. Cursed are the feeble, for they shall be blotted out. Blessed are the bold, for they shall be masters of the world. Cursed are the humble, for they shall be trodden under hooves. Blessed are the victorious, for victory is the basis of right. Cursed are the vanquished, for they shall be vassals forever. Blessed are the battle-blooded, beauty shall smile upon them. Cursed are the poor in spirit, they shall be spat upon. Blessed are the audacious, for they shall have imbibed true wisdom. Cursed are the obedient, for they shall breed creeplings. Blessed are the iron-handed, the unfit shall flee before them. Cursed are the haters of battle, subjugation is their portion. Blessed are the death-defiant, their days shall be long in the land. Cursed are the feeble-brained, for they shall perish amidst plenty. Blessed are the destroyers of false hope, they are the true messiahs. Cursed are the God-adorers, they shall be as shorn sheep. Blessed are the valiant, for they shall obtain great treasure. Cursed are the believers in good and evil, for they are frightened by shadows. Blessed are they who believe in nothing, never shall it terrorize their mind. Cursed are the lambs of God, they shall be bled whiter than snow. Blessed is the man who hath powerful enemies, they shall make him a hero. Cursed is he who doeth good unto others, he shall be despised. Blessed is the man whose foot is swift to serve a friend, he is a good friend indeed. Cursed are the organizers of charities, they are propagators of plagues. Blessed are the wise and brave, for in the struggle they shall win. Cursed are the unfit, for they shall be righteously exterminated. Blessed are the sires of noble maidens, they are the salt of the earth. Cursed the mothers of strumous tenderlings, for they shall be shamed. Blessed are the mighty-minded, for they shall rid the whirlwinds. Cursed are they who teach lies for truth, and truth for lies, for they are abomination. Blessed are the unmerciful, their posterity shall own the world. Cursed are the pitiful, for they shall receive no pity. Blessed are the destroyers of idols, for they shall be feared by tyrants. Cursed are the famous wiseling, their seed shall perish off the earth. Thrice cursed are the vile, for they shall serve and suffer. Contrast this with an orthodox sermonette, one that is repeated every seventh day in thousands of sacred sanctuaries by consecrated black-robed clericals who have been specially trained from boyhood to weepfully, unctuously rehearse the same with upturned eyes and skillful snuffle, or in classic diction, sounding, sonorous, nay, sublime, as suits the occasion. Dearly beloved brethren, God answers all who kneel and pray, is a truth accepted day by day. Behold their bright and joyful lot, who faith in what Christ Jesus taught. If you've empty pockets and tables bare, demand ye not your natural share. That would be wrong, but creep and sigh, you'll go to heaven when you die. For the meek and humble who obey, there's a happy land far, far away. But a fearsome fiery brimstone pit shall melt their marrow who won't submit. If foemen smite you on one cheek, turn round the other, tearful meek. If perjured knaves your votes betray, come wicked sinners kneel and pray. If Hebrews fleece and flay your hide, heaven's gate for you shall open wide. Christ your shepherd won't lead astray. O lambs of God, come bleat and pray. If bruised and beaten, shorn and sold, you're sure of stars in your Father's fold. But robbers rob or rulers slay, he'll roast your souls forever and aye. If elected persons invade your wealth with bribes and lies or deadly stealth, and threat your bones with a bannered host, Christ is your refuge in the Holy Ghost. He'll triumph thus in the dawning years. Hope on, toil on in this vale of tears. Sing, Rock of Ages, cleft for me. Oh, let me hide myself in thee. This poem that is going to close chapter 2, section 12, and chapter 2 in general is called Boldly Stand Erect. Jewish books are for the Jews, and Jew messiahs too. But if you're not of Jewish blood, how can they be for you? To make an idol of a book is poison for the brain. A dying God upon a cross is reason gone insane. Beware of all the holy books and all the creeds and schools, and every law that man has made, and all the golden rules. Laws and rules imposed on you from day of old renown are not intended for your good, but for your crushing down. Then dare to rend the chains that bind, and to yourself be true. Dare to liberate your mind from all things old and new. Always think your own thought, all other thoughts reject. Learn to use your own brain, and boldly stand erect. Examination of section 12. Ragnar Redbeard begins section 12 by mocking the Beatitudes as presented in the book of Matthew chapter 5 verses 1 through 12. The Beatitudes, also known as the Sermon of the Mount, were given by Jesus in Capernaum near the Sea of Galilee, and they consist of a number of universal commandments concerning how to be one's best self. It should be noted that the Beatitudes all begin with the word blessed, similar to the revised version of the Beatitudes as given by Ragnar Redbeard. Redbeard's revised rendition of these commandments are constructed to be antithetical to the Beatitudes as given by Jesus, and in accordance with Redbeard's consequentialist, self-preservationist, social Darwinist personal ideology. Redbeard concluded chapter 2 with a poem that serves as a warning to those exposed to Christian doctrine and philosophy, and advises the reader to think for themselves and to boldly stand erect, that is to say, stand boldly in favor of independence and never waver. A word to the listener from E.I. Smith. Ragnar Redbeard's book, Might is Right, is certainly a perspective-widening document. Alternate perspectives on topics such as the ones discussed in this book are always healthy in my estimation because they allow one to see where they truly stand in relation to their own beliefs and perspectives. Chapter 2 of this book was an enjoyable read for me personally because it challenged me to place into perspective many of my own beliefs, ideas, and perspectives concerning life, nature, society, politics, religion, and self-preservation. Although Redbeard clearly and effectively communicated his personal ideas in Chapter 2 concerning the way society ought to be, I found a contradiction in his premises that I would like to address. Firstly, Redbeard appears to assert that politicians, preachers, moneylenders, and the like are not fit, but that they attain all that they have through conniving, unscrupulous, and deceptive means. If one looks at the true definition of fitness and preservation, even as Ragnar Redbeard himself asserts it, these very men, the men that Ragnar Redbeard refers to as accomplished liars, are the fittest in society because they are the manipulators of it. In looking beneath the surface of Redbeard's assertions, opinings, and declarations, however, he appears to be calling for a revolt of the masses against these accomplished liars. He appears to be challenging the fittest men in American society to overthrow those that have deceived the masses with theological rhetoric and political workings. The kind of fitness that Redbeard appears to associate with the ultimate level of fitness is that which honors man's innate inclinations, namely those of society building, tribalism, protection of one's family, and Gnostic self-preservation. Redbeard appears to see religion and politics as contrived, concocted, and interdependent. Redbeard portrays religion and politics as a two-headed dragon that routinely disrupts the natural, mental, physical, and spiritual workings that rest in each man. Redbeard also appears to call to arms the fittest men of American society so as to slay this evil and destructive two-headed dragon. First by identifying it, then by understanding it, then by destroying it. This chapter in particular, and this book in general, appear to be a call to arms and a source of motivation for men who are as fed up with the socio-political, religious, economic workings of America as Ragnar Redbeard is. And the book Might is Right in general is a declaration of the need for the fittest men in society to slay the Leviathan, the behemoth, the two-headed dragon that is a government that governs through the heavy use of religious and political workings in tandem. This concludes Might is Right, Chapter 2, Christian and Philosophic Examination.